Major support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
So here we are at the dawn of 2018, and it's out with the old and in with the new, right? Well, maybe not so fast. 2017 may have been exhaustingly divisive in some social and political terms, but the rising tide of this economy continues to float most boats, so to speak. Happy New Year and welcome again to the longest running and the most widely watched source of Carolina business policy and public affairs for 28 years now. I am Chris William, and what will this new year hold and how will we feel about this same time next year? It's certainly fun to pretend our future, and we will. And later on, our special guest may have just a housing solution to a chronic problem that has dogged urban and rural communities for decades. John Williams from Camp Tiny House.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Jeff Ruble, Richland County Economic Development. Leslie Boney, of the Institute for Emerging Issues, NC State University. And special guest, John Williams, founder of Camp Tiny House.
Hello, welcome to our program and Happy New Year. Welcome to a new year. This is pretty exciting. So, let's start there. Are you excited about 2018, Leslie? Do you think there are great things coming?
2018 is going to be an amazing year. It's second year of a presidency, second year of a governorship in North Carolina, and just incredible economic development prospects out there and a lot of interesting stuff that's going to be happening on the education front.
Mr. Ruble, what do you think?
Yeah, I guess we've been so busy over the last year or so, unprecedented levels of economic development. It just seems like permanent whitewater, and it seems like it's not stopping. It seems like 2018 is going to be just as strong.
So you both made a reference to maybe last year in the activity that's kind of built up cumulatively to where we are. Is this sustainable? Can we maintain this kind of economic, social, community activity? Leslie, can we continue to do this without taking a bit of a break?
Well, I was at a forecast forum a couple of days ago where people were predicting that this was about the time a recession comes in, but there's just intuitively, it doesn't look like it's coming. It feels like we can sustain this and make this the longest recovery that we've had for a while.
So how do you, and I don't mean you just at Emerging Issues or NC State, how does one model the idea that there will most likely statistically be some kind of slowdown, but yet not lose the enthusiasm and the planning to plan for a continued expansion?
I think you have to be optimistic and assume, plan for have in the back of your mind that the worst could happen, but really understand and believe that there are good things out there and you know what they are. And so you have to keep working on those.
Jeff, it's an interesting term you use, that there's permanent whitewater. I know the South Carolina economic development machine under Bobby hit, of course, but towns like Columbia and Charleston and Greenville and so on have done a wonderful job these last 8 or 9 years. Again, same question. So how do you make sure that you're leaning into that momentum, but you also have an eye that there is a plan B whenever there is a slowdown?
Yeah, I think the biggest constraint has always been labor. The people aspect, I think if you look at it nationally with the GDP, it's probably the same thing at the local level. That's the key thing for us, is getting the labor participation level up, getting more people into the workforce. And I think that's a huge issue for the Charleston and Greenville markets right now, but really across the state, and probably in North Carolina as well. You know, I'd like to think we're always worried about what could happen, but as economic developers, we try to just be upbeat, optimistic, and pin our ears back and go.
Yeah, sure. So Leslie, a couple things coming up. North and South Carolina legislative sessions start pretty soon here. The lawmakers will be back in Raleigh and Columbia at the State House. You have your, in February, you have your Emerging Issues Forum it's going to focus on kidonomics, among other things. What do you hope to hear out of the General Assembly, and what do you hope to move the needle with the forum this year?
Well, I think the General Assembly is going to spend a fair amount of time talking about incentives just because of some big economic development projects and a philosophical disagreement that the state has had for a while about exactly the value of incentives. What we're hoping to do is to focus at least part of the attention on the importance of building that future that Jeff was alluding to. We've got, both states have a lower than average percentage of people under 18 and a higher than average percentage over 65. And so we've got to start planning now to get a greater percentage of those young people performing at high levels by the time they get out of school. And right now, that's just not happening.
Well, you've got folks like Jim Goodnight have been heading up business groups. You've got Best NC, you've got Ed NC, you've got a lot of people that say the same thing that you do. Is it enough, and do you feel like there will be some real movement in 2018 around this? And you're talking about third grade reading scores, I know have been important to that. But, I mean, are you going to move that needle?
Well, one way you do it is you bring everybody into the same room at the same time to hear the same things and talk about the same issues. And that's what we're going to be doing February 5th and 6th in Raleigh, is bringing 1,000 people together to talk about it. We'll have the governor there. We'll have legislative leadership there. We'll have Jim Goodnight and some business leadership there. And we'll all be singing out of the same songbook. And we'll also have a lot of local government officials there. And the idea is, if you can get people in the same room to begin talking about it, you can build off of that momentum so that we can get into May when the short session starts and really make some forward progress. Okay,
so Jeff, South Carolina, the big argument that was transportation infrastructure was a challenge, couldn't fund it, finally got a gas tax. This will be the second year of a 2-cent increase in the tax, which is starting to really make a difference in funding and fixing roads and so on and so forth. So now, for economic developers, for those of you that are business boosters, unadulterated business boosters, what is the biggest challenge going forward?
Particularly for our area, but also the Charleston area, the power issue is really the main concern.
The power grid?
The nuclear issue. So I guess some have characterized that as the largest economic disaster in the state's history. We're in the throes of trying to work that out. That's something for the General Assembly, a major item for them this year. With the latest bid of Dominion for SCANA, we're hoping that that's the first step toward getting some finality so that we kind of know what the landscape is so we can move forward.
Yeah, and a lot of folks have said the political profiling around the outrage that SCANA got to this point. Are we going to be able to get past that political profiling and will South Carolina be able to get down to making real strides in how to fix this mess with SCANA and what happens and how much to pay ratepayers and what it's going to end up looking long term? Do you feel like that's going to be able to get some conclusion in 2018?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. So we've got to deal with the direct issues now, but then there's some structural issues. I mean, what led us to this Baseload Review Act and some of those other issues? Do we need to restructure the ORS, the PSC, some of those institutions?
What's the Office of
Regulatory Services and the Public Service Commission?
Yeah.
So those are structural changes that I think the General Assembly is going to need to look at.
How would you feel about the governor's race this year?
It's going to be interesting. It introduces a lot of fun into the atmosphere at the General Assembly.
You think another female governor could happen here?
Certainly could, yeah.
In North Carolina, we've got about 30 seconds left. Leslie, what would you like to see come out of the General Assembly this year, besides the debate around incentives and besides the issue around education? What do you hope they're going to accomplish?
I think realistically, there's going to be a lot of focus on education. It's the single biggest driver of our budget and single biggest driver of our economy. And getting the balance right between higher ed, K through 12, and the pre-K area, I think is going to be important. All three of those need investment. The question is, what mix is the General Assembly going to figure out is the right one for them, for both the short-term needs that they need to meet and the long-term needs that they're looking to address.
Well, it's fun to be at the beginning of the year and have a lot of hope and enthusiasm. We'll have to review this mid-year and then later on in the year. Gentlemen, thanks. Stay with us. Our guest's going to be on here in just a second. Coming up on this program next week, Bank of America is the second largest by total assets bank in this country, about $2.2 trillion, right behind J.P. Morgan Chase. The operating committee at Bank of America is comprised of a leadership team, and on that leadership team, a very critical job is the chief administrative officer. She will be our guest next week. Her name is Andrea Smith. Andrea's got a lot to talk about, not just from banking, but policy and community development. We will talk to her next week. And also, Dr. Ron Paulus comes back to our dialogue in a couple weeks. He runs Mission Health out of Asheville in western North Carolina, and there is never a boring moment in healthcare. We will find out more about that from Dr. Paulus in 2 weeks. You know, tiny houses are not just for HGTV viewers. In fact, beyond the novelty of its Chihuahua scale, tiny house development, communities, and owners are genuinely proliferating. It's more than a movement. It seems to be a permanent and rapidly growing demographic. Joining us now is Camp Tiny House founder and, in fact, tiny house builder and consultant John Williams. John, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chris.
Was I wrong to say that this is not just a novelty, that this has really grown into quite an industry?
Yes, as you mentioned the word movement, many of the municipalities and things like that thought that it was going to be a phase or a fad and not a movement, and it certainly has turned into a movement, so therefore they've got to deal with them.
Is this, you know, John, what's come up a couple times is we've done our research on the program, but I know you've talked about a lot more than this, is can tiny houses be a solution to a housing problem in urban centers?
Yes, it can be part of the solution, whether it's an apartment building, you know, and all the separate apartments. If you've got a place for a tiny house or a little community of them to be, that would be wonderful. The issues is the cities don't know how to the ordinances, adjust their ordinances and zoning to be able to deal with that and be able to have it come together in a good way.
Yeah. Leslie, question?
Yeah, let's talk about who the target audience is so far and who it could be. So one would think that with millennials finally starting to get back into the housing market, this might be an easy way for them to get into the housing market. And there's also the issue Chris brought up of question of whether this could be an affordable housing solution in communities. Do you have a sense of who the audience is now and who you think it could be in the future?
The audience is a number of people, everything from the high school student building something in their parents' backyard so that they have their own little space, but with the education, the higher education, the students and the mobility of that from them moving around from campus to campus by chance and or going on from there, there means an opportunity to be in something that is mobile and yet a little home and is able to where they can really concentrate and do their studies better. And then also the demographic of the retired people and or middle, it goes the whole spectrum because there's many people that are in the part where they're saying the house is just too much to care for and to deal with, and we only use this much of the home to begin with. We're all huddled around the kitchen table and things at most of the time. And so they're starting to say, to heck with, you know, all of that high maintenance and things and downsize, as they refer to it. And it's remarkable that they would even go from like a 300,000 square foot home into a tiny house, 300 square foot, and skip over the mobile home or that size, square footage size of something, and yet they're praised for doing that. like they're doing a really good thing, and they are.
Is there any buyer's remorse when somebody makes a dramatic change like that?
You know, I'm guessing that there would be the people who try on the shoes for a little while and then find out that they don't really fit and it's not for them. And then there's the resellability of that little tiny house. Now, whether it's the do-it-yourselfers that put something together, you can either make it look like a shack or made out of pallets or something like that, and certainly not be marketable thereafter when you decide to take the next step up and go into a little bungalow house or on up into a home, depending upon your wages and what your desire is. And so the key is to make these little tiny houses, if you will, cute enough or functional enough to where they have good resellability so they can use that as a stepping stone.
Sorry, Jeff, I stepped in front of you here. Please jump in.
No, so you mentioned you've been in business about 4 years. I guess as economic developers, we're often criticized for chasing smokestacks and not paying enough attention to startup businesses. What was it like getting started?
I did not want the business to begin with, and so it was a business that chased me. I started doing some shipping containers in my backyard, digging holes and doing different things, and coming from a background of doing several kinds of building, and back in 79 and 80 I did a lot of earth-sheltered, earth-covered homes, solar passive, and with that you mix all of that and all the dots connect together and you play around with the spaces and places. And then when people saw what I was doing, then I got caught up in doing it for them and not for me. And so it is a business that chased me. I had no intention to be a business of doing tiny houses.
You know, you mentioned, we're talking around the issue of could tiny houses be a partial solution to a housing problem? How do municipalities handle this? Is there a pushback? Do they even know how to handle it?
They don't know how to handle it. There is a pushback. I helped with the Forsyth County and Winston-Salem area changing some ordinances so that we can deal with the behind a regular residence, what used to be referred to as a mother-in-law quarters or whatever, now referred to as ADU, the auxiliary dwelling units. And they could be anything from 200 square foot up to 1,000 square foot in harmony with a home. We did a number of things, off-street parking, and that it could be as an income property behind your regular home and or where a person, sons, daughters, or whatever, relatives could actually be there as well. So they're loosening up in that way, but they don't know how to deal with these do-it-yourselfers building all these tiny houses on trailers and things, and where to be able to put them legally. I mean, legally they can't really go into an RV park without being RV certified, and legally they can't just be set anywhere without the proper tie downs and things like that. Whereas a modular home, or let's back it up and say micro modular, so a small modular home made, manufactured and things, cities like that because it is already inspected and everything else prior to it coming and being put down on a foundation. And I deal with a lot of the cargo container type tiny houses and can't seem to get away from that because it's a built-in storm shelter, so to speak, and the structure is there. And the key is it doesn't have to look like a container to be a container. It is just the core. I do the inside to where it's covered in any way or left the way it is, but I do all the insulation and everything on the outside, so it is not left to look like an industrial eyesore.
Mm-hmm.
Both South Carolina and North Carolina, high net in-migration states. So lots of people moving here, some deficits in housing units out there. To what extent, in these two states that already have high housing ownership, I think South Carolina is number 2 in the country as far as percentage of people owning homes. To what extent is this going to be helpful to those people who are moving here or people who are looking to swap units either down or up?
I think that that's the key right there, is using it as a stepping stone to go up or down. And it is a ready-made, because a tiny house, for square footage that we're referring to, is something that is in the cost of a vehicle. And so instead of mortgages and everything else and the flexibility to be able to take it with them from one place to another, so that flexibility, that small space being downsized and right-sized, so to speak, and so you can, build tiny or, and live large, as part of the cliches go, and less is best, and a number of others. But simply put, it is a good solution for a lot of that, and cities have just got to try to catch up and find a place for them to be, and with the right coding and everything there, because the codes are there to protect the people from themselves. And so there should not be variances of building codes or anything else as it relates to tiny houses.
Mm-hmm.
What data do you have so far about impact of that on surrounding housing values?
With that, everybody is into the not in my backyard syndrome. And so, for instance, you have an opportunity to where perhaps if you look at what's already zoned right for it, like a mobile home park or something like that, and let's say, okay, now let's take these mobile homes and or the park that has really been deteriorated and wipe it clean, get a clean slate, and put double the occupancy in there via tiny houses back to back into the same places, and dress it up and things, and have that sense of pride back into a place that everybody is turning their backs to and trying not to deal with.
Yeah.
I think Chris is interested in a tiny house.
In my
you tell
front
him?
yard, not my backyard.
There you go.
What would you tell him before he's a buyer?
Well, one, we would look at ordinances and things like that, and then two, what's your passion, or where you're really going and for what reasons. And as a consultant, I help people find the ways and means. There's a lot of times with all of this going on right now that there isn't an easy solution of, I want to put it here. And so therefore you may end up calling the horse by a different name. Instead of a tiny house or an occupant or an auxiliary dwelling unit that would be in the backyard or something, it may be referred to as a studio. Now, you may use it as a home and things like that, but if you call it by a different name and you get that in there as an accessory building or a little shed or, mother-in-law man cave or whatever the case may be, then you can kind of migrate into that and do it to where you don't have a lot of objections.
But John, you talked about it. You talk about it in the terms of it's either an entry level or an exit level for residents. You talk about students and seniors.
But what's all the in between? There's so much in between that is
enough
doing that.
to say that there's a lot in between that are buying it. 30, 40, 50-year-olds.
Because they're realizing that there's more to life than having a residence and a mortgage and everything run their life, and they're doing all this work all the time and very little time at home and things, and then when they do, they want to get away from the work with little vacations and stuff, and they want to get away from the house, even the little bit of it that they use, and so they're escaping from that. So now they're waking up saying, let's just right-size it and enjoy life and live large.
Is there a group that is lobbying for a mortgage interest deduction on whatever the loan is that someone may use?
I have no idea about that and don't get into that. And simply put, the cost of the tiny houses or whatever, small houses or park model RVs or whatever the case is, that's basically the cost of a vehicle that you pay off in 5 years. So why even worry about mortgages? And because what mortgage company would even think about?
Because this is America. We love to take things to a exhaustive degree. We've got about 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
You got a question?
Yeah. So getting back to the affordable housing idea,
Yes.
the City of Lexington, North Carolina is
Right.
thinking about this as a possible play to help them solve some challenges they have with affordable housing. Typically, challenges that municipalities have with affordable housing is cost
Right.
and acreage.
Yes.
This would seem to address both of those, and I'm wondering whether you think that has legs.
Oh, by all means, and I am helping out with that, the group where we're working as a whole package for veterans, not only just addressing the housing issue, but addressing them getting back into society as a whole picture and letting that be a stepping stone. So not only for that, but yes, there is so much room and the right direction can be done that way. And when it's done by cities or municipalities like that, they will be the ones setting the examples for others to look at. Were there to scared or not knowing what to do, they can look at Oregon, they can look at other states, but they can start now looking at different little cities within their state and saying, well, how did they do this? Did they do it right?
We have about 30 seconds left, John. Are the Carolinas catching up with places like Oregon in Northeast and Northwest?
I do believe so. I think that they have the capability to catch up if they can get it in black and white in their books, because that's the key. You know, the planners and for the ordinances and things like that.
Yeah, our doctor knows they tend
very
to
difficult
the Heisman for
to
this
do
type
that.
of thing. Thank you, and interesting project you got going on here. Congratulations, and thanks for being on the program, John. Good to see you. Jeff, good luck. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Leslie, nice to have you on the program.
Enjoyed being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Till next week.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Novant Health, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.